The day HR told me to get out, I thought I was walking away from my career. I did not realize I was walking toward the evidence that could collapse a $120 million contract. They pushed me out as a junior engineer, but I came back as the lead external auditor. I watched the people who said they do not negotiate with junior staff try to negotiate with me. My name is Aspen Cook. I am 29 years old, and for the last 5 years, I have been a ghost in the machine at Heliometric Solutions. If you looked at the organizational chart for our mid-sized analytics firm here in Cleveland, Ohio, you would find me buried near the bottom. My official title is Junior Data Engineer. It is the same title I accepted when I was 24. Fresh out of graduate school. Grateful just to have health insurance and a desk. The reality, however, was entirely different. Outside, the gray morning light of a relentless lake-effect winter pressed against the windows. Snow swirled in violent, chaotic patterns against the glass, mirroring the digital storm on my dual monitors. Inside, the office hummed with the sterile, headache-inducing buzz of fluorescent lights and the whir of heating vents struggling against the freezing temperature. Most of the floor was empty. It was barely 7 in the morning. I took a sip of lukewarm black coffee and narrowed my eyes at the dashboard in front of me. It was a sea of red error flags. Silver Peak Commerce, our largest and most critical client, was bleeding data. Their nightly settlement jobs had stalled 3 hours ago, meaning their revenue reporting pipeline was effectively dead in the water. If this was not fixed by 9 in the morning, a national e-commerce group would open their financial day blindly, missing millions of dollars in transaction records. My Slack notifications were stacking up on the side of my screen like small, silent alarms. Where is the patch? Is anyone looking at the latency? Client is asking for an ETA. None of the people sending these messages were fixing the problem. They were account managers, product owners, and senior directors. They were panic merchants. I was the one actually inside the code, surgically removing a corrupted dependency that had choked the system. I had been here since 4 in the morning because my phone had buzzed with the automated alert that the on-call senior engineer had slept through. I typed a quick command into the terminal. The red text flickered, held for a terrifying second, and then cascaded into green. The pipeline breathed again. Data began to flow. I sat back, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for 5 years. Another crisis averted, another major client saved, and nobody would ever really know it was me. My manager, Logan, would stroll in at 9:30, look at the green dashboard, and send an email to leadership praising the team's resilience. I would get a thumbs-up emoji in the general channel. And next week, my paycheck would still reflect the salary of someone they thought was still learning how to code. At noon, the snow was coming down harder. I sat in the cramped break room with Riley Hart, staring at the inside of a plastic container holding a sad salad I had packed 2 days ago. The room smelled of microwaved fish and stale coffee. Riley was the only reason I had not quit years ago. She was an operations analyst, sharp as a tack and just as undervalued. She watched me rubbing my temples. "You look like a corpse," Riley said, not looking up from her phone, and not a fresh one. "I feel like one," I admitted. Silver Peak almost crashed the entire settlement node this morning. I had to rewrite the ingestion logic before breakfast. Riley lowered her phone and looked at me. Her expression was not sympathetic. It was frustrated. "Let me guess," she said. "Logan is currently on the director's call taking credit for the stability of the platform." I shrugged. "Probably." "Aspen, listen to me," Riley said, leaning over the scratched laminate table. "You are on every single escalation thread. When the server goes down at 2 in the morning on a Sunday, they call you. When the architecture needs a patch that none of the senior architects understand, they call you. But when the promotion list comes out in January, you are nowhere. You are invisible." "I know," I said quietly. "You have to stop being the silent firefighter," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper as a marketing associate walked in to use the vending machine. "You are putting out fires they do not even know exist. If you keep doing senior-level work for junior-level pay, they will let you do it until you burn out and die. Then they will just hire 2 more juniors to replace you. Her words sat heavy in the air between us. I wanted to argue, to say that hard work pays off, that loyalty matters. But I knew she was right. That afternoon, I reached my breaking point. I was copied on an email from the VP of Engineering thanking the team for the seamless resolution of the Silver Peak issue. He specifically named 3 people: Logan, a senior architect who had been on vacation for a week, and a project manager who did not know Python from a hole in the ground. My name was not there. I closed my email client. My hands were shaking slightly, not from caffeine, but from a sudden, cold clarity. I opened a blank document. For the next hour, I did not write code. I wrote a business case. I pulled the logs from the last 12 months. I compiled a list of every major outage I had resolved, every dollar of revenue I had protected by preventing downtime, and every complex system upgrade I had led solo. I calculated the market rate for a senior data engineer with my specific skill set in Cleveland. The gap between that number and my current salary was over $40,000. I printed the document. It was 5 pages of undeniable proof. I requested a meeting with Valerie Knox, the head of human resources. Her calendar was open for a 15-minute slot at 4 o'clock for what was labeled as career development. The HR department was on the 4th floor. It felt like a different planet. Down in engineering on the 2nd floor, the air was thick with the smell of ozone, stress, and cheap coffee. The carpet was stained, and the lighting was harsh. But as the elevator doors slid open on the 4th floor, I was hit with the scent of artificial vanilla and aggressive cleanliness. The silence here was oppressive. There was no clacking of mechanical keyboards, no shouting across desks, just the soft hum of a white noise machine and the sound of my own boots on the plush gray carpet. Valerie Knox sat behind a desk that looked like it had never seen a scrap of actual work. It was glass, spotless, and devoid of personality. Valerie was a woman who wore power like a tailored suit. She was scrolling through her phone when I walked in. She did not look up immediately. I stood in the doorway, clutching my folder, feeling the familiar imposter syndrome trying to claw its way up my throat. I pushed it down. I was the one who fixed Silver Peak. I was the one keeping the lights on. Valerie finally set her phone down. Screen up. She gestured vaguely to the chair opposite her. Aspen, right? She said, her tone indicating she had checked my name 5 seconds before I walked in. What can we do for you? I sat down, keeping my back straight. I opened the folder and slid the document across the glass desk toward her. I wanted to discuss my role at Heliometric. I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. As you know, I have been with the company for 5 years. In that time, my responsibilities have grown significantly beyond my official job description. Valerie looked at the papers as if they were a menu she had no intention of ordering from. She flipped the cover page with a manicured nail. I have outlined my contributions over the last fiscal year. I continued, specifically regarding the Silver Peak and North Star accounts. I am currently functioning as a lead engineer on both projects. I am solving architecture-level problems and managing critical incidents. However, my title and compensation are still at the entry level. I paused, waiting for her to read the metrics. I had highlighted the revenue saved in bold. It was a number in the millions. Valerie did not read the bold numbers. She did not read the list of incidents. She flipped through the 2 pages in less than 10 seconds, her eyes barely skimming the text. It was a performance of dismissal. She closed the folder and slid it back across the slippery glass until it hit the edge of the table near my hand. Aspen, she said, leaning back in her ergonomic chair. We appreciate everyone doing their part here. We are a team. I understand that, I said, but I am doing the work of a senior engineer. I am asking for a market adjustment to match the value I bring to the company. I am asking for the title and the salary that reflect my actual output. Valerie sighed, a short, sharp sound through her nose. She looked at me with a mixture of boredom and pity. We have a standard review cycle. Aspen, you know that. The review cycle is 8 months away, I countered. And for the last 2 cycles, I was told there was no budget for promotions, yet we hired 3 new senior managers last month. Valerie's expression hardened. The boredom evaporated, replaced by a cold, corporate steel. "We do not negotiate with junior staff," she said. The words hung in the air, absolute and suffocating. "Excuse me," I asked, thinking I had misheard. "We do not negotiate with junior staff," she repeated, slower this time, as if speaking to a child. "It sets a bad precedent. If we gave a raise to every junior employee who thinks they worked hard one week, we would be bankrupt. There are salary bands for a reason. You are in the band appropriate for your tenure and role." I felt the blood drain from my face. I touched the folder. "But the data," I said, "I just showed you. I am saving contracts worth millions." Valerie stood up. It was a signal that the audience was over. "If you are unhappy, maybe this is not the right place for you," she said. It was not a question, it was a dare. I stood up slowly. My legs felt numb. I looked at her. Really looked at her. She did not care about the outages. She did not care about the code. She did not care that I had slept 3 hours last night to save their biggest client. To her, I was a line item in a spreadsheet, a fixed cost that was trying to become a variable one. "Are you saying there is no path for advancement?" I asked, giving her one last chance to be a human being. Valerie glanced at the door, then back at me. Her eyes were empty. "We are done here," she said. "You are on the clock. Aspen, you should get back to work." She effectively ordered me out of her office like I was a wayward intern who had wandered into the wrong room, rather than a professional who kept her infrastructure from collapsing. I picked up my folder. I did not say thank you. I turned around and walked out. I walked past the frosted glass logo on the wall, past the silent rows of HR offices, and pressed the button for the lobby. I did not go back to the second floor. I could not face the humming lights or the red dashboards or Logan's empty praise. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor and walked out into the lobby. The security guard nodded at me, but I stared straight ahead. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the parking lot. The snow was falling thick and heavy now, burying the cars. I looked at my reflection in the darkened glass. I expected to cry. I expected to feel the hot sting of humiliation or the crushing weight of fear about losing my livelihood. But as I stared at the woman in the reflection, I realized I was not crying. My eyes were dry. My pulse was slow. Inside my chest, the anxiety that had driven me for 5 years, the fear of not being good enough, the desperate need to prove myself, the terror of making a mistake was gone. It had been replaced by something else, something colder, something sharper. They saw me as a junior. They saw me as disposable. They saw me as a cog that could be swapped out without consequence. "We do not negotiate with junior staff." The phrase echoed in my mind, but it no longer sounded like a rejection. It sounded like permission. If I was just a junior staff member, then I had no responsibility to save them. If I was disposable, then I owed them no loyalty. If they refused to negotiate, then I was no longer bound by the social contract of going above and beyond. I was finally free to act exactly like the employee they paid me to be. I turned away from the window. I was not going home. I was going back to my desk. But the Aspen cook who walked back into the elevator was not the same person who had walked out of it 10 minutes ago. The silent firefighter was dead, and they had no idea what they had just ignited in her place. Returning to my desk felt like walking into a room where a party had ended hours ago, but everyone was still pretending to dance. I moved through the open-plan floor like a ghost. The hum of the servers and the chatter of the sales team were exactly the same as they had been 20 minutes ago. But I was entirely different. Nobody looked at me. Nobody knew that the person sitting down in the ergonomic chair was no longer the loyal employee who would fix their mistakes for free. I was something else now. I was a liability waiting to happen. Logan Mercer, my manager, did not notice the shift in the atmosphere. He did not even notice I had been gone. As I sat down, he rolled his chair over, holding a lukewarm energy drink. "Hey, Aspen," he said, his eyes glued to his own screen. I need you to redesign the main dashboard for the logistics team. They want the color scheme to match the new branding by tomorrow morning. Just a quick refresh." He dropped the request on my desk like a physical weight. A quick refresh. That was code for 4 hours of tedious CSS work and database remapping that he had probably promised them a week ago and forgot about until now. "Sure." "Logan," I said. My voice was steady. It was frighteningly steady. "Great, thanks," he said, and rolled back to his station to browse sports forums. I stared at the back of his head. For the first time, I did not feel the urge to open my calendar and frantically rearrange my night to accommodate him. I just watched him. I watched the way he took credit for my code. I watched the way he assumed I would always be there, silent and grateful. I want to ask you something. You, listening to this right now, have you ever been told to be grateful for a job that is slowly killing you? Have you ever sat in a meeting, listening to a manager explain a project you built, while they fumble the details and smile as they collect the bonus? If you have, I want you to tell me where you are listening from. Are you in your car? Are you at your desk right now, wearing headphones so your boss does not hear? Because if you are, you know exactly what that cold feeling in my chest felt like. It is the feeling of realizing that your loyalty is the weapon they are using against you. I finished the day on autopilot. I answered emails with minimal words. I wrote code that did exactly what was asked and not a single line more. When 5 o'clock hit, I stood up. Usually, I stayed until 6 or 7 to monitor the evening batch loads. Not today. Leaving Logan asked, surprised. "I have an appointment," I lied. I walked out into the snow without looking back. That night, my apartment felt smaller than usual. It was a one-bedroom unit facing a parking lot that was currently being buried under 6 inches of lake-effect snow. The wind rattled the window frame. I sat on my second-hand couch with my laptop on my knees, the blue light of the screen illuminating the dark living room. I opened LinkedIn. I had not updated my profile in 2 years. I had been too busy working to think about leaving. The interface loaded, bright and professional, a stark contrast to the gray reality of my day. I hesitated. Updating a profile is a signal. It is a digital flare that says you are looking. If Logan or Valerie saw it, they would know I was planning something. Then I remembered Valerie's face. "We do not negotiate with junior staff." I clicked the edit button. I did not change much. I just updated my skills section, adding the specific cloud architecture certifications I had earned over the last year, the ones Heliometric had refused to pay for. I hit save. Almost immediately, a notification badge appeared in the corner of the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had they set up an alert on me? I clicked it. "Your profile was viewed by Silver Peak Commerce." I froze. Silver Peak was our biggest client, the client I had just saved this morning. Why were they looking at me? I thought back to a night 3 months ago. It was 2 in the morning. Silver Peak had a tax reporting misalignment that was threatening to trigger a federal audit. Their own team was stumped. Our team was asleep. I had logged in, traced the error to a legacy stored procedure, and fixed it while on a conference bridge with their data director. I remembered his voice calm, intelligent, and incredibly relieved. Aiden Shaw. I stared at the notification, while I was trying to process what it meant. My phone buzzed. It was an email, not to my work address, but to my personal Gmail account. Subject: Quick question. Anomaly. I opened it. "Hi, Aspen. I hope you do not mind me reaching out to your personal email. I found it on your LinkedIn profile. I saw the work you did on the settlement pipeline this morning. It was impressive speed. I am looking at some anomalies in our data feeds over the past few quarters, things that do not quite add up on our end. I recall you being the only one who could explain the tax logic to me last November. Would you be open to a short, off-the-record conversation, not an interview, just a chat? Best. Aiden Shaw, Director of Data Strategy. Silver Peak Commerce." I sat there in the dark, the wind howling outside. Valerie's voice looped in my head. "We do not negotiate with junior staff." She was right. They did not negotiate. But she forgot one thing. If Heliometric refused to negotiate with me, maybe someone else would. I typed a reply. Hi, Aiden. I have some time tomorrow morning. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The next morning, I did something I had never done in 5 years. I sent Logan a message at 8 in the morning saying I was taking a personal day. I offered no explanation. I did not say I was sick. I did not say I had a family emergency. Logan's reply came 10 minutes later. Okay. Running errands. Make sure you are online by 1 for the stand-up. He assumed it was errands. He assumed I was just catching up on life so I could serve him better later. For the first time, I let him stay wrong. I did not correct him. I did not apologize. I simply closed the chat app. I put on my best blazer, a navy blue one I had bought for a conference they never let me attend, and drove to the Silver Peak headquarters. The difference between Heliometric and Silver Peak was like the difference between a prison and a university. Heliometric was gray, cramped, and smelled of ozone. Silver Peak was located in a modern glass building on the other side of town. When I walked through the revolving doors, the first thing I noticed was the light. The lobby was a cathedral of natural light, pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the frozen lake. There were plants everywhere real, living monstrosities of green that thrived in the warmth. The air smelled like fresh coffee and rain, not artificial vanilla. I walked to the reception desk. The receptionist was on the phone, but she smiled at me and held up a finger to signal she would be right with me. Hi, can I help you? She asked when she hung up. I am here to see Aiden Shaw. I said, my name is Aspen Cook. She typed my name into the system. Oh, yes, Aiden is expecting you. Here is your visitor badge. She handed me a badge that had my name printed on it. Not handwritten, printed. They had prepared for me. Aiden Shaw came down to the lobby himself. He was taller than I expected, wearing a gray sweater and jeans that probably cost more than my car. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. Aspen, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for coming. He shook my hand firmly. There was no condescension in his grip, no dismissive glance at my shoes or my bag. This way, he said. He led me not to a generic interview room, but to a glass-walled meeting space near the back of the ground floor. Inside, a woman was already sitting at the table. She had a tablet in front of her and a posture that suggested she missed nothing. Aspen, this is Priya Dalton, Aiden said, closing the door behind us. Priya is our lead of information security. My stomach dropped. Security. Aiden sat down and gestured for me to do the same. The room was quiet. I want to be clear, Aspen. Aiden started, leaning forward. You are not in trouble, at least, not with us. Priya looked at me. Her gaze was intense but not unkind. We asked you here because you are the only person at Heliometric who seems to actually touch the code. She said. Her voice was low and direct. We have been tracking the data quality reports coming from your firm for 6 months. She tapped her tablet. On paper, everything looks perfect, she continued. Your service level agreements are at 99% uptime. The error rates are negligible. But our internal logs tell a different story. We are seeing transaction latencies that vanish by the time the weekly report arrives. We are seeing timestamps that look adjusted. Aiden jumped in. I know you are a junior engineer there. Aspen, I know you probably just execute the tickets they give you, but you fixed that tax bug in real time. You saw the raw logs. He paused, looking me dead in the eye. Does Heliometric manually edit their failure reports before sending them to us? The question hung in the air. It was not a casual question. It was a question that could end a contract. It was a question that could end a company. I looked at Aiden, then at Priya. I thought about the dashboard I had fixed yesterday. I thought about the red flags I had turned green. I thought about the fixed scripts Logan made us run that wiped error histories. And then I thought about Valerie Knox. We do not negotiate with junior staff. They thought I was a junior. They thought I was too low on the totem pole to understand the architecture of their deception. They thought I was safe because I was invisible. I took a slow breath. The air in the room was clean and filtered. It felt like the truth. I am not just a junior engineer, I said, my voice finding a strength I did not know I had. I am the one who wrote the reporting scripts you are looking at. Aiden and Priya exchanged a look. It was the look of two people who had just found the key to a locked door. Then, Aiden said softly, "Tell us what we are really looking at." Aspen. I leaned back in the chair. For 5 years, I had been the silent firefighter. I had protected Heliometric from their own incompetence. I had hidden their mess to save my job. But they had told me to get out. So I was going to get out, and I was going to take the truth with me. "I can do better than tell you," I said. "I can show you where to look." Aiden leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The conversation had shifted from the technical specifics of the data architecture to something far more delicate. We were sitting in the glass-walled meeting room at Silver Peak, and the air felt charged with an unstated proposition. He looked at Priya, then back at me. "We have a proposal for you." "Aspen," Aiden said. His voice was casual, but his eyes were not. "We are preparing for our annual vendor review with Heliometric next month. Given the anomalies Priya mentioned, we want to be armed with better questions. We have a subset of reconciliation logs and raw settlement files that are entirely Silver Peak property. We would like to hire you as an independent consultant for the weekend to review them." He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a consulting agreement. The hourly rate listed was 3 times what I made at Heliometric. "Just a weekend consult," he added. "You help us understand what we are looking at. You help us ask the right questions." I stared at the paper. The money would cover my rent for 2 months. It was tempting. But 5 years of corporate conditioning does not vanish in 24 hours. I felt a sharp pang of loyalty to the company that had just told me I was worthless, followed immediately by a wave of caution. I picked up the pen, but I did not sign, not yet. "I need to set a clear boundary," I said. My voice was firm. "I will not access Heliometric systems for this. I will not copy their proprietary code, and I will not share their internal documentation. I will only look at data that Silver Peak owns and has the legal right to share with a third party." I needed them to know that even though I was angry, I was not corrupt. I was not a corporate spy. I was an engineer. Aiden smiled, and it looked genuine. "We would not ask you to do anything else," he said. "We want your brain, Aspen, not their trade secrets." I signed the paper. That weekend, the snow was still falling across Cleveland. My apartment was quiet. Save for the hum of my refrigerator and the rhythmic tapping of my keyboard, I had set up my workstation at the kitchen table, flanked by a pot of strong coffee and a stack of hard drives Aiden had given me. I started at 10 in the morning on Saturday. By 2 in the afternoon, the coffee was cold, and I had not moved. The data Silver Peak had provided was massive. It consisted of gigabytes of CSV files, server logs, and transaction receipts from their payment gateway. It was a mess of numbers and timestamps, boring to anyone else, but to me, it was a story. I began by correlating the API response codes from Heliometric with the actual transaction counts in Silver Peak's settlement bank. In theory, these two things should be identical mirrors. If Heliometric's API said a transaction was successful, the money should appear in the bank. I wrote a Python script to parse the files, matching the unique transaction IDs across the 2 datasets. I watched the terminal window as the script ran, processing row after row of data. Match, match, match. Then, a mismatch. I frowned and stopped the script. I zoomed in on the discrepancy. On November 14th, the Heliometric feed reported a successful batch of 5,000 transactions at 3 in the morning. The status code was a clean 200, meaning everything was fine. But when I looked at the Silver Peak bank logs for that same window, the money had not arrived until November 16th. 2 days later. That could have been a banking delay. It happens sometimes. I restarted the script. 10 minutes later, it found another one. December 2nd. A batch of 10,000 transactions marked as successful on the day of, but the funds did not settle for 48 hours. I started seeing a pattern. These were not random glitches. They were ghost transactions. I dug deeper into the metadata of the successful API responses. Every single one of the mismatched transactions had a specific latency flag in the header. It was a flag that usually indicated a timeout of failure, but the final status was being overridden to show success. My stomach tightened. I knew this logic. I recognized the fingerprint of the code. 6 months ago, Logan had come to my desk in a panic. He said the quarterly reporting metrics were looking bad because of too many timeout errors during the nightly backups. He told me to write a patch that would catch these specific timeout errors and hold them in a queue to be retried later, but to report them as received so the client dashboard remained green. He had called it a temporary stability patch, he said, and I could hear his voice clearly in my memory. Just keep the report stable until we refactor the pipeline next quarter. We never refactored the pipeline. I sat back in my kitchen chair, the cold winter light fading outside. I had written the code that was doing this. I had written it under direct orders, believing it was a buffer, a temporary fix to stop false alarms. But looking at the data now, I realized it was not stopping false alarms. It was hiding real failures. Heliometric was masking the fact that their system was choking on large batches. They were telling Silver Peak that the data was processed instantly, while in reality, they were scrambling to reprocess it days later. This was not just bad code. This was financial misrepresentation. I needed to be sure. I needed to see the original request. I opened my personal laptop, where I kept my own archive of notes. I was a meticulous note-taker. I saved every ticket number, every requirement, every conversation log in a personal Evernote file because Logan had a habit of changing his mind and blaming me for it. I searched for the date June 12th. There it was. Ticket number 4092, title latency, suppression for nightly batch, description implement, temporary hold logic for timeout responses to improve dashboard stability. I had the ticket number, I had the date, I had the proof that I was instructed to do this. I logged into the web interface for the project management tool Heliometric used. I still had access. My resignation notice was only 2 days old. I typed in ticket number 4092. The screen refreshed. Ticket not found. I stared at the screen. I typed it again. Ticket not found. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the drafty window. In a properly managed engineering system, you do not delete tickets. You close them. You archive them. But you never delete them. A deleted ticket means someone went into the database with administrative privileges and scrubbed the record from existence. They had erased the history. If I had not kept my own notes, there would be no record that Logan had ever asked for this. If Silver Peak discovered the issue on their own, Heliometric would point to the code, see my commit signature, and say that a junior engineer had gone rogue and written a bug. I was not just a ghost in the office. I was being set up to be the scapegoat. I spent the rest of Sunday writing the report for Aiden. I wrote with surgical precision. I did not use emotional language. I did not use the word fraud. I did not mention Logan or the deleted ticket. Not yet. I titled the document Analysis of Discrepancies in API Response States versus Settlement Latency. In the executive summary, I wrote, the analysis reveals a systemic pattern where failed transaction batches are programmatically modified to return a success status code. This results in a 48-hour delay in actual revenue settlement that is not reflected in the service-level agreement reports. The frequency of this occurrence suggests a deliberate logic implementation rather than a sporadic system error. I recommended a full third-party audit of the codebase. I sent the email to Aiden at 7 in the evening on Sunday. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the plow trucks scrape the asphalt outside. I kept thinking about the ticket. Who had deleted it? Was it Logan? Was it someone higher up? And how many other tickets were missing? Monday morning. My phone rang at 8:30. It was Aiden. Aspen, he said. There was no small talk. Did you send this to anyone else? No, I said, just you. Good, he said. I read it 3 times. Priya read it. There was a pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. Aspen. His tone had shifted completely. This is not just a consulting gig anymore. I need you to come in today, not to the lobby. I need you to come to the executive suite on the 30th floor. But I have work, I said, the absurdity of the statement hitting me even as I said it. I am still technically employed at Heliometric. I have to go in. Call in sick, Aiden said. His voice was hard, authoritative. I have our chief financial officer and our general counsel waiting to speak with you. They want to walk through your findings. I sat up on the edge of my bed. The room was freezing. What does this mean? Aiden, I asked. It means, he said, that if your report is accurate, Heliometric is not just in breach of contract. They have been falsifying financial data that we report to the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is regulatory exposure. Aspen, this is the kind of thing that shuts companies down. He let that sink in. We need to know everything, he said, and we need to know if you are willing to stand by this report when the lawyers get involved. I hung up the phone. My hand was trembling. I had wanted a raise. I had wanted a title change. I had wanted them to respect me. Instead, I had just pulled a loose thread that was attached to a $120 million lie. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked pale. But I also looked like someone who was done being afraid. I picked up my phone and messaged Logan. I am not coming in today. I wrote, I am not feeling well. It was the truth. I felt sick to my stomach. But as I put on my blazer and headed out the door to meet the lawyers at Silver Peak, I knew that the sickness was not mine. It was Heliometric's, and I was about to be the one to diagnose it. Monday morning at Heliometric Solutions was a study in oblivious denial. I walked into the office carrying the weight of a corporate death sentence in my head. Yet the world around me was maddeningly normal. The fluorescent lights hummed their same headache-inducing frequency. The coffee machine in the kitchenette was still broken, leaking a brown puddle onto the counter, and Logan Mercer was standing in the middle of the aisle, clapping his hands together like a camp counselor trying to rally tired children. Happy Monday, team, Logan announced, his voice too loud for 8:30 in the morning. I have some great news. Leadership has approved a budget for Pizza Friday this week. We are going to get the deep dish from that place downtown. He beamed, waiting for applause. There was none. A few engineers muttered thanks without looking away from their monitors. The Zendesk queue on the main overhead screen was currently displaying 42 open tickets, 3 of which were marked critical. Logan did not look at the screen. He looked at us, seemingly convinced that pepperoni and cheese were sufficient substitutes for fair pay and competent management. I sat down at my desk and unlocked my computer. The contrast between the reality I had seen in Silver Peak's glass conference room and the reality Logan was living in was disorienting. He was planning a pizza party. I was planning how to avoid being arrested for securities fraud. An hour later, an email notification pinged from HR. It was marked high priority. Subject: cultivating gratitude and shared success. I opened it. It was from Valerie Knox. The email was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. It did not address any specific issues. Instead, it spoke in broad, passive-aggressive paragraphs about the importance of culture fit. It contained phrases like leaning in during tough times and understanding that reward follows loyalty. The final paragraph was bolded. True team players understand that compensation is a long-term conversation, not a short-term demand. Those who are not aligned with our values of patience and gratitude may find that their path lies elsewhere. It was a subtweet sent to 200 people. Some of the developers around me chuckled, reading it aloud in mocking voices. They thought it was just another tone-deaf message from an out-of-touch executive. But I knew better. I felt the cold weight of it in my stomach. Valerie was not just talking to the company, she was talking to me. She was doubling down on her threat. This was her way of telling me to get back in line or get out. She did not realize that she was handing me the very thing I needed. I closed the email. I thought about the meeting I had just left with Silver Peak's legal team. They had hinted strongly that a formal external audit was inevitable. Once that audit began, Heliometric would need someone to blame. They would need a scapegoat to explain why the data was falsified. They would not blame the director of engineering. They would not blame Logan. They would look for the person whose fingerprints were on the code. They would look for the junior engineer who had no paper trail to defend herself. If I was still an employee when the subpoena arrived, I would be the collateral damage. I needed to leave, and I needed to leave before they realized the war had started. I spent the rest of the morning working in silence, but I was not writing code for Heliometric. I was curating my defense. I did not download a single byte of Heliometric's proprietary source code. I knew the laws. If I took their intellectual property, I would give them a legal weapon to use against me. I was smarter than that. Instead, I gathered the evidence that belonged to me. I opened my personal cloud storage. I uploaded the chronologically sorted PDF copies of my performance reviews, where I was praised for high reliability. I uploaded my personal calendar exports, showing the hundreds of hours of overtime I had worked on weekends and holidays. I uploaded the incident retrospectives I had written for my own learning documents that clearly outlined the root causes of failures I was told to patch rather than fix. I created a timeline. It started from the date Logan asked me to install the latency suppression logic and ended with the date the ticket was deleted. I noted every conversation, every Slack message I could remember, and every directive I had received verbally. I was building a shield. At 4 p.m, I went home. My apartment felt like a bunker. I sat on my couch, watching the snow fall on the parking lot, feeling a strange cocktail of adrenaline and exhaustion. My personal laptop chimed, a new email. I frowned. It was not from Aiden. It was not from a recruiter. It was from an address that was a random string of alphanumeric characters at a secure, encrypted email provider. Subject: keep this. You didn't see it from me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hovered the cursor over the attachment. It was a CSV file. I scanned the file for viruses. Clean. I opened it. It was a raw database export from Heliometric's internal logging server. But this was not a table I had access to. This was the audit trail for the database itself, the log that recorded who changed the data. I scrolled through the rows. My breath caught in my throat. There were hundreds of entries showing manual updates to the batch status column for Silver Peak transactions. The user ID associated with the changes was not a service account. It was a human user ID. I recognized the ID string. It belonged to a director in the implementation team, someone who reported directly to the executive level, someone who played golf with Valerie's husband. But the most damning part was the column on the far right. Original timestamp, November 14, 0300 hours. Modified timestamp, November 14, 0301 hours. Someone had gone in and manually overwritten the timestamps to make late transactions look on time. And because this was the master audit log, it showed that the editability of these fields had been forced. The system was designed to prevent this. But someone had used an admin override to break the safety glass and tamper with the numbers. I sat back, my hands shaking. I was not the only one watching. Someone else inside that gray building knew exactly what was happening. Someone else was disgusted by the lies. They had seen me walking out of HR that day. They had seen me leave early. They knew I was the one fixing the pipelines, and they knew I was the one being set up. This person could not speak up. Maybe they had a mortgage, or kids, or a visa tied to their employment, but they had sent me the ammunition I needed. I felt a sudden surge of responsibility. This was no longer just about getting revenge for a denied promotion. This was about the quiet people. It was for the developers who were told to work harder to cover up management's incompetence. It was for the support staff who had to lie to clients. It was for whoever sent me this file. If I walked away quietly, nothing would change. But if I walked away strategically, I could burn the corruption down. I opened the browser and navigated to the Heliometric HR portal. The interface was clunky and slow. I clicked on the tab marked Employment Status. There was a small link at the bottom, almost hidden Initiate Separation Process. I clicked it. The screen loaded a series of cold, drop-down menus. Reason for leaving, I selected Other. Effective date. I selected a date exactly 2 weeks from today. Then came the text box. Feedback. Please tell us why you are leaving. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to write a novel. I wanted to detail every insult, every unpaid hour, every deleted ticket. I wanted to tell them about the fraud I knew they were committing. I wanted to scream in all caps that they were rotting from the inside out. But I stopped. Information is power. Right now, they thought I was just a disgruntled junior employee who was sad about not getting a raise. If I wrote a manifesto, I would tip my hand. I would let them know I was dangerous. I needed them to think I was weak until the moment the trap snapped shut. I typed 2 words into the box. No comment. I hit submit. The screen flashed a green banner. Your resignation has been submitted to Human Resources and your direct manager. It was done. The tether was cut. I expected a phone call. I expected Logan to storm out of his house and call me. I expected Valerie to demand an exit interview. Instead, 20 minutes later, I received a single email from Valerie Knox. Subject re-resignation, Aspen Cook. The body of the email contained 1 sentence. Received and processed. Attached to the email was a file named Exit Checklist Standard, PDF. I double-clicked the attachment. Adobe Reader opened, swirled for a moment, and then displayed an error message. The file is corrupted and cannot be opened. I stared at the error message and started to laugh. It was a dark, dry laugh that rattled in my empty apartment. It was perfect. It was absolutely symbolic of my entire 5 years at Heliometric. Even their process for getting rid of people was broken. They cared so little about my departure that they could not even be bothered to send a working file. They truly believed I did not matter. Over the next few days, I became a ghost on purpose. I went into the office, but I was not really there. I sat at my desk, but I did not engage. When Logan asked about the dashboard, I sent him the link to the repository and said, "It is all in the documentation." I attended the daily stand-up meetings via Zoom, keeping my camera off. When it was my turn to speak, I said, "No blockers," handing over documentation. I watched them. I watched Logan making jokes. I watched the director who had altered the timestamps walking around in his expensive suit, looking confident and untouchable. I watched Valerie ignore me in the hallway. They looked at me and saw a defeated woman who was slinking away with her tail between her legs. They saw a problem that had solved itself. They assumed I would serve my 2 weeks, disappear into the unemployment line, and never be heard from again. The silence around my departure was loud. There was no card. There was no counteroffer. There was just the collective relief of a system that had successfully expelled a foreign body. I let them have their relief. I let them have their arrogance. I sat in the back of the room, answering only direct questions, organizing my files, and watching the clock tick down. They thought I was fading away. They had no idea that I was not walking into oblivion. I was walking into the war room, and I was bringing the maps. The conference room at Silver Peak was silent, but it was not the empty silence of the Heliometric HR department. It was the heavy, expensive silence of people making decisions that would move millions of dollars. I sat across from Aiden, but he was not the only one at the table this time. To his right was the chief financial officer, a man named Marcus Thorne, who looked like he was carved out of granite. To his left was the general counsel, a woman named Lena Ortiz, who had a reputation for dismantling vendors who tried to cut corners. They had read my preliminary report. They had seen the analysis of the latency discrepancies. "Miss Cook," Marcus Thorne said. His voice was deep and lacked any unnecessary inflection. "We have reviewed your findings regarding the transaction timestamps. We have also cross-referenced them with our own internal banking ledgers." He paused, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. "If your technical assessment is correct," he continued, "Heliometric has not only failed to meet their service-level agreements, but they have actively concealed that failure through data manipulation. That puts them in breach of both the technical and reporting clauses of our multi-year contract." I nodded slowly. The reality of what I had uncovered was sitting right there in paper and ink. "It is correct," I said. "I double-checked the logs against the settlement times. The pattern is undeniable." Lena Ortiz leaned forward. Her eyes were sharp. "We are moving to initiate a formal audit," she said. "We have the right to do this under Section 14 of our agreement. Usually, We would hire a Big Four accounting firm to handle this. They are good at numbers, but they do not know the architecture. They do not know where the bodies are buried. She looked at Aiden, then back at me. We want someone who knows exactly where to look. We want you. I blinked. Me. We want to retain you as the lead external auditor for this investigation. Marcus said, "You know their code. You know their culture. You know exactly how they hide things because you were the one forced to build the curtains." A wave of adrenaline washed over me, followed immediately by a sharp spike of fear. "I cannot do that," I said, my voice steadying itself. "I am still an employee of Heliometric. That would be a massive conflict of interest. It would invalidate the entire audit. They would sue me, and they would sue you." Aiden smiled. He expected this answer. "We know." He said, "That is why this offer is contingent on your effective separation date. We are not asking you to start today. We are asking you to start the morning after your resignation becomes final." He slid a second document across the table. It was a contract. I looked down at the cover page. The text was bold and black. Independent Contractor Agreement. Role Lead External Data Integrity Auditor. Client Silver Peak Commerce. I turned the page to the compensation section. I had to read the number twice. The hourly rate they were offering was not just a raise. It was calculated to annualize at more than double my salary at Heliometric. Beneath that, there was a line item for a discretionary budget to hire a small technical support team. I looked up at them. They were offering me a weapon. "I have conditions," I said. "Name them," Lena replied. "I must be fully separated from Heliometric." I said, "No overlap. No proprietary data leaves the building with me. I will not use any passwords or access keys I possessed as an employee. Everything I find during the audit must be found using access granted to me as an external auditor under the terms of your contract with them. Everything must be legal. Everything must be by the book." Lena nodded, looking impressed. "That is exactly how we want it." I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed the document. The next 5 days at Heliometric were a surreal blur of rumors and silence. My resignation had triggered the office gossip mill, but not the truth. The truth was too dangerous. So Valerie Knox had manufactured a narrative. I heard it first in the break room, whispered between two sales associates who did not know I was standing behind the vending machine. "I heard she is burning out." One of them said, "Valerie told the team leads that she just couldn't handle the pace of the enterprise accounts. She is taking a break to work on her mental health." "Yeah," the other one replied. "Or maybe she's going to some tiny startup that will go bust in 6 months. You know how the juniors are. They always think the grass is greener." I stood there, clutching my coffee, listening to them rewrite my history. Valerie was painting me as weak. She was telling the company that I was leaving because I was not good enough, because the pressure crushed me. She was doing damage control, trying to minimize the perceived loss, so that no one would question why the engineer responsible for their biggest client was walking out the door. I let them talk. I let them believe I was weak. It was better this way. If they thought I was burning out, they would not expect me to come back with a flamethrower. My last day was a Thursday. There was no party. There was no cake in the break room. There was no email from leadership wishing me well in my future endeavors. The silence was a final, petty insult designed to make me feel small. I spent the afternoon wiping my laptop. I deleted my personal files, cleared my browser history, and organized the handover documentation on the shared drive. A few coworkers walked by my desk. They did not stop to chat, afraid of being seen associating with the defector, but they dropped their voices as they passed. "Good luck, Aspen," one of the QA testers whispered. "You deserved better than this place." "Take care of yourself," a support lead said, dropping a sticky note on my desk with his personal number. At 4 o'clock, Riley Hart walked over. She looked nervous. She was holding a lukewarm coffee and pretending to ask me about a documentation link. She pulled up a chair and sat close to my desk. "So this is it," she said quietly. "This is it," I replied. Riley looked around to make sure Logan was not in earshot. He was in his office, laughing loudly on a phone call. "Aspen," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I need to tell you something. Before you go." I looked at her. Her eyes were wide and terrified. "That email," she said, "the one with the export, the one with the timestamps." I froze. I stared at her. "It was you," I breathed. Riley nodded, tears forming in the corners of her eyes. "I was the one who pulled it. I tried to flag it to the director of operations 3 months ago. He told me to mind my own business if I wanted to keep my job. I did not know who else to trust. But when I saw you walking out of HR that day, I knew you were the only one who would actually do something with it." I reached out and squeezed her hand. It was cold. "Thank you," I said. "You gave me the smoking gun." "Please," Riley said, her voice trembling, "do not forget about us. There are good people here. We are just stuck. We cannot all just walk out." I looked at her, really looked at her. Riley was brilliant, hardworking, and trapped by a mortgage and a fear of the unknown. She was exactly who I had been a week ago. "I promise," I said. "I am not going to forget." I finished packing my box. It was light, a framed photo of my dog, a succulent that had miraculously survived the lack of sunlight, and a coffee mug. I shut down my laptop. The screen went black. I heard the fans spin down into silence. It was the sound of 5 years of my life ending. I stood up. I put on my coat. I picked up the box. Logan was still in his office. He did not look up. Valerie was on the 4th floor, probably drafting another email about loyalty. I walked to the elevator. I rode it down to the lobby. I walked past the security desk and toward the sliding glass doors. The doors opened with a soft hiss. The cold winter air hit my face, sharp and clean. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The snow was falling again, coating the gray city in white. I turned and looked back at the building. The heliometric logo glowed above the entrance, imposing and indifferent. For 5 years, that building had been a cage. Today, it was just a building, and I was no longer the person who belonged inside it. I was not walking away from my story. I was walking into the second act. 1 week later, I stood in front of a mirror in my apartment. I was wearing a new suit. It was sharp, tailored, and black. I looked different. My posture was straighter. The shadows under my eyes had started to fade. I drove to Silver Peak Commerce. I parked in the visitor lot, but this time, I did not feel like a visitor. I walked through the revolving doors into the lobby full of light and plants. The receptionist looked up. She smiled, a genuine smile of recognition. "Good morning, Ms. Cook," she said. "Your new badge is ready." She handed me a plastic card on a lanyard. I looked at it. Aspen Cook, Lead External Data Integrity Auditor, Silver Peak Commerce. I put the lanyard around my neck. It felt heavy, grounded. I walked to the elevators. As I waited, the doors opened, and a group of Silver Peak employees walked out. Among them was a project manager I had interacted with dozens of times over the phone as just the junior engineer. He stopped. He looked at me. He looked at the badge. "Aspen," he asked, confused. "I thought you were... I heard you left Heliometric." "I did," I said, pressing the button for the executive floor. "Then what are you doing here?" he asked, glancing at the badge again. His eyes widened as he read the title. I smiled. It was a smile that did not reach my eyes. "I am here to finish the work," I said. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside and turned to face the doors. As they closed, I saw the look on his face shift from confusion to a dawning realization. He knew what an auditor was. He knew what it meant when the person who knew all the secrets came back with the power to expose them. The elevator began to rise. I watched the floor numbers tick up. 1, 2, 3. I was going back to Heliometric later this week, but I would not be walking in through the employee entrance. I would be walking in through the front door, flanked by lawyers, holding a contract that gave me the right to tear their house down brick by brick. Valerie said they did not negotiate with junior staff. I wondered how she would handle negotiating with the person holding the demolition order. The transition from engineer to auditor was not just a change in title. It was a change in gravity. As a data engineer, My job had been to keep things moving, to ensure the flow of information never stopped. As an auditor, my job was the exact opposite. My job was to freeze the frame, to stop the motion, and to look at the things that everyone else was trying to ignore. The kickoff meeting for the audit took place in a dedicated war room on the 30th floor of Silver Peak's headquarters. The walls were covered in whiteboards, and the table was strewn with printed contracts and network topology maps. I stood at the head of the table. For the first time in my professional life, I was not waiting for permission to speak. I was the one setting the agenda. "We are defining the scope as a rolling 12-month look-back," I said, pointing to the timeline I had drawn on the board. "We need to cover the entire fiscal year. If we only look at the last quarter, Heliometric will claim these are isolated incidents caused by recent updates. We need to show a pattern of behavior." Lena Ortiz, the contract specialist assigned to my team, nodded. She was a woman of few words, but every word she spoke was a legal scalpel. "Section 14, paragraph 3, Lena said, consulting the thick binder in front of her. "The client reserves the right to audit all historical data logs related to billing and service level agreements for a period of up to 3 years. 12 months is well within our rights. They cannot push back on that." I looked at the 2 internal engineers Silver Peak had assigned to assist me. David and Sarah were sharp, quiet, and terrifyingly efficient. They did not care about office politics. They cared about binary truth. "I want us to focus on 3 specific data artifacts," I told them. "First, the raw API ingestion logs. Second, the reconciliation report sent to the finance team. And third, the internal ticket history for the engineering team. We need to map every outage to a ticket, and every ticket to a resolution. If there is an outage with no ticket, or a ticket with no code change, we flag it." For the next 3 days, we built our case. It was like assembling a puzzle where half the pieces had been deliberately hidden. We pulled multi-month aggregates of the data Silver Peak already held. As I sifted through the massive CSV files, I started to see something that made my blood run cold. It was not just the Silver Peak account. I found traces of placeholder IDs in the log headers that did not belong to Silver Peak's range. These were stray packets, likely leaked from a shared staging environment that Heliometric used for multiple clients. The error-masking logic, the code that caught failures and repainted them as successes, was using a generic variable naming convention. It suggested that this was not a custom hack for one difficult client. It suggested that Heliometric had a recipe. They had a standard toolkit for masking failures, and they were likely deploying it across their entire customer base whenever a contract was at risk. I called David over. "Look at this," I said. "Look at the dates of the anomaly spikes." David leaned in, adjusting his glasses. He ran a quick query to visualize the frequency of the timestamp mismatches. "They cluster," he said. I pulled up a calendar. March 31st, June 30th, September 30th, December 31st. The spikes and masked failures happened exactly 2 weeks before the end of every fiscal quarter. "It is the executive review cycle," I said, the realization settling in my stomach like a stone. Every time they have a quarterly business review coming up, the system miraculously stabilizes. They suppress the errors to make the 90-day trailing averages look green. Then, once the review is over and the contract is renewed, the error rate creeps back up. They were smoothing reality. They were ironing out the wrinkles so the leadership team at Silver Peak would sign the checks without asking questions. "We need to verify this on site," I said. "We can infer it from the logs we have, but to prove intent, we need to see the configuration files on their actual servers. We need to see the dates the code was deployed." Lena looked up from her laptop. "I will draft the notice," she said. "The contract stipulates that for a comprehensive audit, the vendor must provide on-site access to relevant hardware and personnel. We are going to tell them we are coming." The notification went out on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, the legal pushback began. Heliometric's legal team sent a frantic letter to Lena. They argued that an on-site audit was disruptive, unnecessary, and potentially a security risk, but their biggest objection was me. Lena called me into her office and handed me the email. "Read the second paragraph," she said. I read it. Heliometric Solutions formally objects to the appointment of Ms. Aspen Cook as the lead auditor. Ms. Cook is a former employee who resigned less than 2 weeks ago. We believe her involvement constitutes a significant conflict of interest and compromises the objectivity of the audit. We are concerned that this investigation is being driven by a personal vendetta rather than a legitimate business need. I lowered the paper. A personal vendetta. Valerie Knox had clearly dictated that sentence. It was her voice. She was trying to frame me as the bitter ex-employee, the junior who was lashing out because she did not get a raise. She wanted to make the narrative about my emotions so that no one would look at her data. I looked at Lena. "Does this stop us?" Lena smiled. It was a cold, shark-like smile. "Not even slightly," she said. "In fact, it helps us." She turned her laptop screen toward me so I could see the response she was drafting. Silver Peak Commerce rejects the objection regarding Ms. Cook. It is precisely Ms. Cook's intimate knowledge of heliometric systems and legacy architecture that makes her the only qualified individual to conduct this audit efficiently. Her prior employment is not a conflict. It is a necessary qualification for navigating your complex internal environment. Furthermore, the audit relies on hard data, which is not subject to personal bias. If the data is accurate, you have nothing to fear. She hit send. "They are going to hate you," Lena said matter-of-factly. "They are going to try to rattle you. They are going to try to make you cry, or scream, or lose your temper. If you get emotional, they win. If you stay clinical, they hang themselves." "I understand," I said. The date was set. Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. I spent Wednesday compiling my armor. I did not pack a physical shield. I packed data. I created a binder. In it, I placed the side-by-side comparisons of the timestamps. I included the list of deleted tickets that I had recovered from my personal notes, identifying them only by number, not by content, so they could not accuse me of stealing proprietary text. I included the contract clauses that defined uptime and latency. I rehearsed my lines. I stood in front of the whiteboard in the war room and practiced explaining the discrepancies. I practiced saying, "The timestamp metadata indicates a manual alteration," instead of "I know Logan changed this because he is a liar." I practiced saying, "The error handling logic redirects to a null bucket," instead of "You are deleting customer data to save your bonuses." I stripped every ounce of anger out of my language until all that was left was the cold, hard geometry of the truth. Wednesday night, I was alone in my apartment. The wind was howling outside, rattling the window frames. I laid my outfit out on the bed. When I worked at Heliometric, I wore cardigans and jeans. I tried to look soft. I tried to look like I belonged in the background. I tried not to take up space. For tomorrow, I chose a structured blazer in a sharp charcoal gray. I chose a silk blouse that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I chose boots with a heel that clicked loudly against the floor. I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at the woman staring back at me. Valerie Knox had told me to get out. She had told me I was not worth negotiating with. She had dismissed me as a line item, a replaceable cog in her machine. Tomorrow, I was going to walk back through those doors. I was not going to ask for a raise. I was not going to ask for a promotion. I was going to ask for the logs. I closed my eyes and practiced my breathing. In for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, out for 4 counts. I knew what they would do. Logan would try to joke. Valerie would try to intimidate. The director who altered the logs would try to bluster and deny. They would try to make it personal. I opened my eyes. The reflection was steady. "I will not take the bait," I said aloud to the empty room. I turned off the light. I needed to sleep. Tomorrow was not just a return, it was an invasion. Walking back into the lobby of Heliometric Solutions felt less like a return and more like an invasion. The last time I had stood on this gray industrial carpet, I was a frantic employee holding a box of personal belongings, wondering if I would be able to make rent. Today, I was walking in with the full weight of a $120 million client behind me. I approached the reception desk. "Sarah," the receptionist who had ignored me for 5 years, was typing on her phone. She looked up, her eyes glazing over with the habitual indifference she reserved for junior staff. And then she saw the suit. Then she saw the lawyers behind me. And finally, she saw the badge. I placed my identification on the counter. The plastic clicked sharply against the laminate. "Good morning." "Sarah," I said, "Aspen Cook, external auditor for Silver Peak Commerce. I am here for the 9 o'clock with Valerie Knox." Sarah straightened up so fast she almost knocked over her coffee. Her indifference evaporated, replaced by a sudden, nervous politeness. "Ms. Cook," she said, fumbling for the visitor log. "Of course. They are expecting you in the executive conference room. Here's your pass." She handed me a visitor badge. It was red. It had the word "Audit" printed on it in bold. Block letters. I clipped it to my blazer lapel. It felt like I was pinning on a sheriff's star. I signaled to the 2 Silver Peak engineers, David and Sarah, and we moved toward the security gates. To get to the executive wing, we had to walk through the main analytics floor. This was calculated. I could have asked for a private escort, but I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to know I was back. As the glass doors slid open, the familiar sound of the office hit me, the hum of the servers, the clatter of keyboards, the low murmur of voices on calls. Then, silence. It started at the front desks and rippled backward like a wave. As I walked down the main aisle, conversations cut off mid-sentence. Heads turned. People stood up in their cubicles to look. I kept my eyes forward, but I saw them in my peripheral vision. I saw the developers I had covered for. I saw the project managers who had ignored my emails. I saw the fear in the eyes of the middle managers, and I saw something else in the eyes of the junior staff. I saw quiet, terrifying pride. They were watching one of their own walk back in with the power to burn the place down. I was halfway to the conference room when Logan Mercer stepped into the aisle. He looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled, and he had the frantic energy of a man who had not slept in days. He put on a smile that was too wide and too loud. "Aspen," he called out, extending a hand as if we were old friends meeting at a bar. "Look at this. The prodigal engineer returns. How are you doing? We missed you at the stand-up this morning." He laughed, a sharp barking sound that no one else joined in on. I stopped. I did not take his hand. I looked at him. Then I looked meaningfully at the red badge on my chest. Logan's eyes darted to the badge, then back to my face. His smile faltered. "I am working." "Logan," I said. My voice was cool, detached. It was the voice of a stranger. Right, he stammered, stepping back to let me pass. "Just saying hello. No hard feelings, right?" I did not answer him. I kept walking. We reached the executive conference room. The blinds were drawn. I opened the door and stepped inside. Valerie Knox was already seated at the head of the long mahogany table. Flanking her were the company's in-house general counsel, a man named Greg, who always looked bored, and the director of finance. Valerie looked up. Her expression was a masterpiece of forced neutrality, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her pen. On the table in front of her was a thick binder labeled Silver Peak Engagement Documentation. It was a prop. It was meant to signal that they were prepared, that they were transparent, and that they were in control. "Aspen," Valerie said. She did not stand up. "Thank you for coming." I took the seat directly opposite her. David and Sarah sat on either side of me, opening their laptops in perfect synchronization. "Let us begin," I said. Greg, the general counsel, cleared his throat. He opened a thin folder. "Before we get into the technicals," he said, his tone dismissive, "we want to establish the parameters of this audit. We understand Silver Peak has some concerns about recent reporting. To avoid unnecessary disruption to our operations, we have prepared logs for the last 60 days. We feel this creates a representative sample of current performance." Valerie nodded. "Anything older than that is essentially operational archaeology," she said. "It has no relevance to the current contract status. Digging through year-old logs is a waste of everyone's time." It was a trap. The bulk of the manipulated data, the deleted tickets, The ghost transactions happened between 3 and 9 months ago. If I agreed to a 60-day window, I would walk away with nothing but minor bugs. I did not argue. I did not get angry. I simply reached into my briefcase and pulled out a copy of the Master Service Agreement. I slid it across the table. It spun smoothly on the polished wood and came to a stop in front of Greg. Section 14, paragraph 3, I said. Greg looked at the document, then at me. He knew what it said. I recited it from memory, keeping my eyes locked on Valerie. The client reserves the right to audit all historical data logs, system configurations, and communication records related to billing and service level agreements for a period of up to 3 years. This access shall be unfettered and includes any materially related historical records required to establish a pattern of performance. I leaned forward slightly. We are not here for a 60-day sample. Valerie, we are here for the full fiscal year. We are here for every ticket, every patch note, and every server log from January 1st to today. Valerie's jaw tightened. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second. We cannot just grant open access to our entire historical archive, she snapped. We have other clients. We have proprietary algorithms. We need to manage which logs are available to protect our intellectual property. She was trying to retain the right to curate the evidence. She wanted to filter the files before I saw them. I opened my notebook and uncapped a pen. I am noting that the head of Human Resources is refusing to comply with the data access clause of the contract, I said, writing the words down as I spoke. I will be including this obstruction in the preliminary report to Silver Peak's Board of Directors this afternoon. They will likely view this as an admission of guilt. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the scratching of my pen against the paper. The director of finance looked at Valerie. He looked pale. He knew what it meant if Silver Peak pulled the contract for cause. It meant bankruptcy. Give her the access, he whispered. Valerie stared at me with pure venom. She had lost. Fine, she said, her voice tight. It will set up a read-only profile for you. I stood up. Thank you. We will begin in the server room. I walked out of the conference room, my heart pounding against my ribs, but my face completely calm. I had won the first round. As we moved toward the server room, we had to pass the break area. I saw Riley standing by the coffee machine. She was holding a mug, looking at the floor. She did not wave. She did not smile. But as I passed her, she turned slightly, shielding her movements with her body. She reached out and placed a folded yellow Post-it note on the edge of the counter, right next to the sugar packets. She walked away without looking back. I slowed down. I picked up the note and slipped it into my pocket in one fluid motion. Once we were inside the secure server room, amidst the deafening roar of the cooling fans and the blinking lights of the racks, I unfolded the note. It was not a message. It was a URL and an IP address. Internal Archive Legacy, Heliometric, Local Port, 8280. Below it, she had written 2 words, Shadow Volume. I understood immediately. When companies migrate to new systems, they often keep the old servers running in the background as a failsafe. Usually, they forget about them. These shadow volumes contain the raw, untouched data before it gets processed, scrubbed, and polished for the client dashboards. Heliometric leadership pretended this system did not exist. They thought they had scrubbed the main production database. They thought the deleted tickets were gone forever, but they had forgotten the ghost in the machine. I sat down at the console. I did not log in with the restricted guest account Valerie had authorized. I used the admin credentials Silver Peak's contract entitled us to. I typed in the IP address Riley had given me. The screen flickered. A login prompt appeared. It was an old interface, dusty and forgotten. I entered the credentials. Access granted. I navigated through the directory structure. It was all there. The raw logs, the original transaction outcomes, the unaltered timestamps. I opened a file dated November 14th. There it was, the original batch failure. No manual edit, no admin override, just the raw, ugly truth of a system failure that had been covered up with a lie. I looked at David. Start the copy, I said, my voice barely audible over the fans. We have everything. The digital archaeology took 3 days. We set up a command center in a small, windowless conference room next to the server farm, isolating ourselves from the rest of the heliometric office. The air conditioning hummed a constant, low monotone, and the only light came from our monitors and the blinking LEDs of the server racks visible through the glass partition. I worked with David and Sarah, the engineers from Silver Peak. We did not speak much. We just dug, and every shovel of dirt we turned over revealed something uglier than the last. The first thing we found was the zombie army. In any secure system, when an employee leaves, their access is revoked immediately. It is Security 101. But as I ran a query on the active user list for the production database, I recognized names that should not have been there. I saw the account of a senior developer who had moved to California 8 months ago. I saw the account of a project manager who had been fired last year. These accounts were not just active, they were being used. I pulled the login history. The California developer's account had logged in on November 14th at 3 a.m, the exact time the Silver Peak batch failure had occurred. Someone inside the building was using the credentials of former employees to make changes to the database, creating a layer of plausible deniability. If the changes were ever traced, they would lead to a ghost. David called me over to his screen. "Look at this script," he said, pointing to a block of code. It was a Python script used to process the nightly settlement files, hard-coded right into the logic, bypassing the secure vault, were API keys with administrative privileges. Above the code block, a developer had left a comment in all caps, temporary band-aid, "Do not merge to main, fix later." The commit date was 6 months ago. I cross-referenced the script ID with my personal notes. This was the patch I had been told to ignore. I searched for the ticket that should have mandated its removal. It was one of the missing tickets. They had slapped a dirty fix onto a critical financial system, hard-coded the keys, and then deleted the paper trail that reminded them to remove it. They had left the back door wide open because closing it was too much work. But the smoking gun was not in the code. It was in the finance drive. Using the broad access rights I had forced Valerie to grant, I scanned the shared directories for any files modified around the dates of the quarterly reviews. I found a folder nested 5 levels deep, buried under drafts and old projects. Inside was a spreadsheet named numbers_final_approved.xlsx. I opened it. It was a map of the lie. The spreadsheet had 2 main sections. The left columns were labeled actual failures. The numbers in these columns were high, showing the true error rates that would have breached the contract and triggered penalty clauses. The right columns were labeled presentation values. These numbers were significantly lower, smoothed out to look like minor, acceptable variances. Between them was a column with a formula that took the actual failures and multiplied them by a reduction factor to generate the fake numbers. The cells were color-coded: green for client safe, red for internal panic. It was not a bug. It was not a mistake. It was a strategy document. I saved a copy to our secure drive. Now I had the intent. I needed the action. I went back to the legacy archive I had accessed using Riley's hint. I pulled the raw logs from November 14th. Then I pulled the official logs that had been sent to Silver Peak. I put them side by side on my monitor. On the left, the raw log showed a batch failure at 3 a.m. On the right, the official log showed a success at 3:15. I drilled down into the metadata of the official log. In a properly automated system, the modified by field should list a system process. Here, it listed a user ID. I ran the ID against the employee directory. It belonged to Logan Mercer. I checked the next altered batch. The user ID belonged to a director of implementation, a man I knew was one of Valerie's closest allies in the company. They were doing it themselves. The managers were manually logging into the database in the middle of the night, changing false to true, and saving the file. They were overwriting reality with their own hands. My phone buzzed. It was Riley. She had sent me a series of images. They were screenshots of an internal chat group named War Room. I zoomed in on the text. Director Silverpeak is asking about the latency again. They are obsessed with these integrity metrics. Logan, just massage the numbers so they stop whining. I will update the batch status tonight. Director, make sure you use the old account so it does not trace back to my login. Logan done. They won't know the difference. I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. They were mocking the client. They were joking about the fraud. To them. Silverpeak wasn't a partner. They were an annoyance to be managed with lies. I had enough. Thursday afternoon, 2:00. The executive conference room was full. Valerie Knox sat at the head of the table, looking composed but tense. Logan sat next to her, tapping his pen on the table. The director of implementation was there, looking bored. On the large monitor at the end of the room, the faces of the Silverpeak team were visible via video link. Aiden was there. So was Lena Ortiz. And sitting in the center, looking like a judge, was Marcus Thorne, the chief financial officer of Silverpeak. I stood at the podium. I did not have a script. I did not need one. I connected my laptop to the projector. "Good afternoon," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the shaking anger I felt inside. "We have completed the initial phase of the data integrity audit." I clicked the remote. The screen filled with the spreadsheet, the numbers final approved file. The room went very quiet. I saw Valerie's eyes narrow. Logan stopped tapping his pen. "This document was retrieved from your internal finance drive," I said. "It outlines a calculation method for reducing reported error rates by 40% prior to quarterly reviews." I clicked again. The screen split. On the left was the raw log from the legacy archive. On the right was the altered log sent to Silverpeak. In the center, highlighted in red, was the metadata showing Logan's user ID as the editor. We have identified 23 separate instances where the database was manually altered to change a failure status to a success status. I continued. The edits were performed by accounts belonging to Mr. Mercer and the Director of Implementation, as well as 3 accounts belonging to former employees that remain active. I looked at Logan. He was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked at Valerie, panic rising in his eyes. Valerie cleared her throat. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Aspen," she said, her voice tight with forced condescension, "you are misinterpreting standard data cleaning. That spreadsheet is an internal planning tool used for capacity forecasting. It is a hypothetical model, not a report." Logan jumped in, his voice cracking slightly. "And the timestamps. That is a known logging bug. The system sometimes tags the last user to view the file as the editor. We have a ticket open for that." The director leaned back, crossing his arms. "Honestly, this feels overly aggressive for such a small discrepancy. You are trying to turn a software bug into a conspiracy." Gaslighting. They were doing exactly what I knew they would do. They were denying the reality that was staring them in the face. I looked at the screen where Marcus Thorne was watching. Then I turned back to the room. I did not raise my voice. I did not let them see me sweat. I brought up the final slide. It was the screenshot of the chat log Riley had sent me. "Just massage the numbers so they stop whining." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb that had just stopped ticking and was about to detonate. Logan looked at the screen. He saw his own words. He saw his own name. He sank back into his chair, looking like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Valerie looked at the screen, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear behind her eyes. She looked from the screen to me, and she realized that I had not just come for the data, I had come for the culture. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, leaving the chat log burned into everyone's retinas. I looked Valerie in the eye. "If this is how you treat your largest client while the contract is still active," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a razor, "Silverpeak needs to understand what has been done with their data. And more importantly, they need to ask what could be happening with everyone else's." I let the sentence hang there. It was an invitation to total collapse. If they did this to Silverpeak, They did it to everyone. On the monitor, Marcus Thorne leaned forward. His face was grim. "We have heard enough," he said. His voice boomed through the conference room speakers. Valerie turned toward the camera. "Marcus, please, let us context you." Marcus cut her off. "We have heard enough to take immediate interim action," he said. "This is not a bug. Valerie, this is fraud." The feed cut out. The screen went black. I stood alone in the silence of the conference room. I looked at the people who had told me I was worthless. They were not looking at me anymore. They were looking at the blank screen, realizing that the ghost they had pushed out of the building had just brought the roof down on their heads. The letter from Silver Peak Commerce arrived at Heliometric's legal department at 4 p.m. on Thursday. It was not a long letter. It did not need to be. It was a formal notice of contract suspension. Effective immediately, all accounts payable to Heliometric Solutions were frozen pending the completion of the external audit. All new development work was halted. All integration projects were paused. For a company like Heliometric, which relied on the steady cash flow from its largest client to cover payroll and server costs, this was not just a red light, it was a grenade thrown into the engine room. I was back at the Silver Peak offices, sitting in the war room with David and Sarah, when the fallout began. We did not need to be in the Heliometric building to feel the tremor. We could see it on the shared dashboard screens where the ticket queues suddenly stopped moving. But the real chaos was happening inside channels I was not supposed to see. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Riley. She did not send text. She sent screenshots, dozens of them. The executive Slack channel at Heliometric, usually a quiet place for golf schedules and revenue bragging, had exploded. "Who authorized the reporting adjustments the VP of Sales demanded in all caps? I have the entire East Coast account team asking why their commission checks might bounce next month." Valerie Knox replied, her tone terse even in text form. "We are managing the situation. The audit is being conducted by a former employee with a grievance. We are challenging the findings." A senior technical director shot back, "Challenging the findings." She showed a diff log on the projector. "Valerie, she has the raw database exports. Who gave her the access?" I watched the screenshots roll in like a ticker tape of disaster. They were turning on each other. The unified front of corporate arrogance had shattered the moment the money stopped flowing. They were demanding names. They were demanding to know why a junior engineer was suddenly holding the keys to their financial future. Then came the rats. At 5:30, my LinkedIn notification pinged. The director of implementation, the man whose user account had been used to alter the timestamps, had just updated his profile. He was no longer director at Heliometric. He was now seeking new opportunities in data leadership. He had resigned less than 3 hours after the conference room meeting. He was trying to outrun the blast radius. 20 minutes later, I heard from Riley that a senior manager in Logan's department had gone on sudden, indefinite medical leave. They were disappearing. They knew that when the regulatory bodies got involved, I was just following orders, would not be a valid legal defense. My personal inbox, which had been radio silent for weeks, began to flood. Former colleagues who had barely acknowledged my existence when I sat 3 desks away were now sliding into my DMs. "Hey, Aspen." One message read, "I heard you are running the audit. That is so cool. Just wanted to say I always respected your work. By the way, do you know if the report names specific developers I was just doing what Logan told me?" Another one came from a project manager who had once rolled his eyes when I asked for overtime pay. "Aspen, long time no see. Things are getting crazy here. If you hear of any openings at Silver Peak, could you put in a good word for me? I have always admired their culture." I read them with a cold detachment. These were the people who had watched me drown in work for 5 years and said nothing. They were the ones who laughed at Valerie's email about loyalty. Now that the ship was sinking, they wanted me to be their lifeboat. I did not reply to them. Instead, I opened a blank document on my secure laptop. I started a list. I wrote down Riley's name. I wrote down the name of a quiet quality assurance analyst who always flagged bugs that management ignored. I wrote down the name of the site reliability engineer who had secretly helped me patch the servers on weekends without claiming credit. I was separating the complicit from the trapped. I would help the people who did the work. The rest of them could explain their loyalty to the bankruptcy court. The next morning, Heliometric tried to fire back. They sent a formal response letter to the Silver Peak board. It was signed by their CEO, but it was written in Valerie's voice. The letter accused the audit team of methodological bias. It claimed that the lead auditor, me, was acting out of personal dissatisfaction regarding a prior employment dispute. It argued that the discrepancies in the data were being exaggerated to fit a narrative of revenge, and that Heliometric stood by its 99% uptime record. It was a desperate attempt to make this about feelings rather than facts. They wanted to paint me as an angry, emotional woman who was settling a score. I sat in the boardroom at Silver Peak with Aiden, Lena, and Marcus Thorne. The letter lay in the center of the table. Marcus looked at me. "Do you want to respond to this?" he asked. I pulled my laptop toward me. I did not need to write a letter. I needed to show the truth. I connected to the main screen. I pulled up the contract, specifically the clause defining uptime. Then I pulled up the raw logs from the shadow volume. Then I pulled up the numbers final approved spreadsheet. I did not use adjectives. I did not use the word revenge. "Claim 1, I said, my voice steady. Heliometric claims 99% uptime. I highlighted the column in the raw logs. Data indicates actual uptime for the fiscal year was 84%. The difference represents 112 hours of unreported downtime. Claim 2, I continued. They argue the discrepancies are exaggerated. I highlighted the formula in their own spreadsheet. This is a hard-coded multiplier that automatically reduces error counts by 40% before report generation. This was created by their director of finance and saved on a shared drive. This is not an exaggeration. It is a math equation they wrote to deceive you. Claim 3, I said, looking finally at the accusation about my character. They claim this is personal. I pointed to the screen. The logs do not have feelings. The timestamps do not have a vendetta. The data is binary. It is either true or it is false. And everything Heliometric has sent you for the last 12 months is false. Marcus Thorne nodded slowly. He looked at the letter from Heliometric. Then he crumpled it into a ball and tossed it toward the wastebasket. "The narrative is dead," he said. An hour later, the Silver Peak Board of Directors convened an extraordinary session. I was asked to present the findings. These were not tech people. These were investors, bankers, and industry titans. They did not care about Python scripts or API keys. They cared about risk. I walked them through the findings, translating the technical fraud into the language of liability. I explained that because Heliometric processed financial settlements, their manipulation of the data meant that Silver Peak's own financial filings to the Securities and Exchange Commission were technically inaccurate. I saw the color drain from the chairman's face. "Are you telling us," one board member asked, "that we have regulatory exposure?" "Yes," I said. "If you continue to report these numbers as true, you are complicit. But because we caught it, and because we have the raw data to correct it, you can self-report and mitigate the damage. But you need to cut the cord with the vendor immediately." The room erupted in a low murmur of urgent conversation. They were not talking about fixing the relationship with Heliometric. They were talking about how fast they could terminate the contract and sue for damages. I stood there, watching them. I realized that I had done it. I had not just proven a point. I had shifted the tectonic plates of a multi-million-dollar business relationship. After the meeting adjourned, the room cleared out until only Aiden, Lena, and I remained. Aiden looked exhausted but triumphant. Lena looked like she had just won a chess match in 4 moves. "Aspen," Aiden said. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down for a second." I sat. I expected them to thank me. I expected them to hand me my check for the consulting hours and send me on my way. I had done the job. I had killed the beast. "We have been talking," Lena said. "This audit has exposed a massive hole in our operation. We relied entirely on vendors to tell us the truth. We assumed that because we had contracts, we had safety." She paused. looking at me with a level of respect I had never seen in a corporate office. "We were wrong. We need to make sure this never happens again. Not with Heliometric, and not with the replacement vendor we are going to hire." Aiden slid a piece of paper across the table. It was not a consulting contract. It was an offer letter. "We want to build a new department," Aiden said. "The Office of Data Integrity and Compliance. Its sole job will be to audit our partners, verify our own pipelines, and ensure that the numbers we see are the numbers that exist." I looked at the title on the offer letter. Founding Director. The salary was a number that made my breath catch in my throat. It was more money than I had ever thought I would see in my life. It was 3 times what I had begged Valerie for just 2 weeks ago. "We want you to run it," Aiden said. "You are the only person who walked into a burning building to get the truth. We need that fire here." I looked at the paper. I looked at the title. Director. 2 weeks ago, I was a junior engineer who was told to get out because I wasn't worth negotiating with. I was told I was invisible. I was told I had no future. Now the people who had dismissed me were panic messaging me for help, and the people who actually held the power were asking me to lead them. I thought about Valerie Knox. I thought about her sitting in her office, staring at a frozen budget and a fleeing team. I thought about the words she had said to me, "We don't negotiate with junior staff." She was right. I wasn't junior staff anymore. I picked up the pen. "I accept," I said, "but I have one request for my first act as director." Aiden smiled. "Anything." "I want to handpick my team," I said, "and I know exactly where to find them." The final audit report sat on the table in front of me. It was 75 pages long, bound in a simple black cover. Inside, printed on heavy archival paper, was the autopsy of a corporate lie. It documented every misrepresentation of failure states, every instance of unauthorized data manipulation, and every systemic process failure that Heliometric Solutions had engineered over the last fiscal year. But the most important thing about the report was not the data. It was the name printed on the cover page. Lead author Aspen Cook, Director of Data Integrity and Compliance, Silver Peak Commerce. I ran my hand over the text. 2 weeks ago, my name had been buried at the bottom of an organizational chart, associated with a salary that barely covered the cost of living in the city. Now, it was the first thing the board of directors would see before they voted to dismantle a company's future. The board meeting had happened at 9 o'clock that morning. I was not in the room for the vote, but Aiden had texted me the result immediately after. Unanimous. The board had voted to terminate the multi-year contract with Heliometric for cause, citing material breach of trust and falsification of financial data. In the same motion, they had approved the full operating budget for my new department. I had the funding to hire 5 engineers, 2 analysts, and a legal specialist to oversee all future vendor relationships. The money that had once flowed to Heliometric to pay for Valerie Knox's bonuses was now flowing to me to ensure she could never lie to us again. But the paperwork was only the legal death. The ceremonial execution was happening now. As a formality, Silver Peak had invited the Heliometric leadership team to a closing meeting. The invitation was vague. It simply stated the purpose was to review the audit findings and discuss next steps. They did not know the contract was already dead. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought they were coming in to haggle over penalty fees or service credits. They thought they could talk their way out of it, just like they always had. We held the meeting in the boardroom on the 30th floor, Silver Peak's largest and most intimidating space. It had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the snow-covered city. In the distance, if you squinted, you could see the gray concrete block of the Heliometric building. I sat at the head of the table. To my right sat Aiden. To my left sat Lena Ortiz. The door opened. The Heliometric delegation filed in. It was the chief executive officer, a man named Richard Sterling, who usually only appeared for photo opportunities. Behind him was the chief financial officer, looking pale and sweaty, and bringing up the rear, carrying her leather portfolio like a shield, was Valerie Knox. They stopped when they saw me. For a second, the room was completely silent. Richard Sterling looked at me, then at Aiden, confused. He clearly expected to see a peer, another CEO, or at least a VP. He did not expect to see the former junior engineer who had resigned via a web portal 2 weeks ago. Valerie froze mid-step. Her eyes locked onto mine. I saw the recognition hit her, followed immediately by a flash of indignation. She stiffened, adjusting her blazer, and forced a tight, condescending smile. "Ms. Cook," Richard said, recovering his composure, but failing to hide the disdain in his voice. "I was not aware you would be chairing this discussion." I did not stand up. I did not offer my hand. I simply gestured to the empty chairs at the far end of the table. "Please, take a seat," I said. They sat. They looked small. The long mahogany table created a vast physical distance between us, a distance that felt like a canyon. Richard cleared his throat. He opened his notebook. "We have read the preliminary summary," he began, using his boardroom voice. "Obviously, we dispute the characterization of these data discrepancies as intentional. However, in the spirit of our long-standing partnership, Heliometric is prepared to offer a significant service credit for the next quarter. We are also willing to replace the account management team to rebuild trust." He was bargaining. He was offering up sacrificial lambs. He was willing to fire Logan, or the account rep, or anyone else to keep the revenue flowing. Valerie leaned forward, sensing that her CEO's offer needed more emotional weight. "I think it is important to understand the context," Valerie said, looking at Aiden rather than me. "There seems to have been a significant miscommunication between our senior leadership and our junior technical staff regarding the implementation of these reporting protocols." She paused, casting a side glance at me. "Sometimes, junior employees do not fully grasp the nuance of client management or the complexity of the architecture they are working on." She continued, "They interpret data literally without understanding the business logic. We are taking steps to ensure better training so that this kind of confusion does not happen again." She was doing it again. She was blaming the junior staff. She was blaming the very people she had overworked and underpaid. She was rewriting history to make me look incompetent so she could look like a victim of her own workforce. I felt a flash of heat in my chest, but I did not let it reach my face. I let the silence stretch out for 5 seconds, 10 seconds. I let her words hang in the air until they started to smell like the lie they were. I opened the black folder in front of me. I turned to the recommendations section. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, the executive summary of the termination order. I slid it down the long table. It hissed against the polished wood and came to a stop directly in front of Valerie's hands. "Valerie," I said. My voice was soft, calm, and terrifyingly distinct. She looked up from the paper, her eyes meeting mine. "You once told me," I said, "that you do not negotiate with junior staff." I saw her throat move as she swallowed. She remembered. Of course she remembered. "You told me that if I was unhappy, I should leave." I continued. "You told me that my value was fixed and that my understanding of the business was irrelevant." I leaned forward, clasping my hands on top of the report. "Today, you are sitting in this room because a junior staff member documented everything you refused to see. You are here because the person you dismissed as a liability was the only one keeping your product functional. And now, she is the one deciding whether your company survives this fiscal year." Valerie's face went gray. The mask of corporate control crumbled. She looked at the CEO, then back at me. She realized, in that moment, that she had created her own executioner. Richard, the CEO, picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He read the header. "Termination of contract for cause." "Wait," Richard said, his voice rising an octave. Has this been voted on?" "It has," Lena Ortiz said. Her voice was like a gavel. "The Silver Peak board voted unanimously this morning. The contract is terminated effective immediately. All access to our systems has already been revoked. Your security badges will stop working in 10 minutes. Richard looked frantic. He looked at Aiden. "We can renegotiate," he pleaded. "We will cut the fees by 50%. We will give you the platinum tier service for free. We will fire the entire leadership team if that is what you want. Just tell us what the number is." I looked at him. I thought about the 5 years I had spent patching their broken code. I thought about Riley eating lunch in that cramped break room. I thought about the deleted tickets and the gaslighting. "There is no number." "Richard," I said. "But," Richard stammered, "we can fix this. We can negotiate." I stood up. The movement signaled that the meeting was over. "We do not negotiate with fraud," I said. I turned to Valerie. "And we certainly do not negotiate with people who think the truth is a variable they can edit." I closed the folder. "Please see yourselves out," I said. "Security will escort you to the lobby." They stood up. They moved like zombies. Valerie did not look at me again. She gathered her things with trembling hands and walked out the door, following her CEO into the hallway. They looked like people who had just watched their world end, and they had. The door clicked shut behind them. The room was quiet. Aiden let out a long breath. "That," he said, "was intense." "It was necessary," I replied. I sat back down, but I did not relax. I pulled out my phone. I had one more thing to do. I had taken the sword to the leadership, but I needed to throw the life raft to the crew. I opened my encrypted messaging app. I had a list of 7 names: Riley Hart, the QA analyst, the site reliability engineer, the support lead who had given me his number. I typed a message to the group. "The contract is terminated. Heliometric is going to go through a restructuring. Do not panic. I have approved 7 new headcount positions for the Data Integrity and Compliance Office at Silver Peak." I attached the job descriptions. "Check your personal emails. The offers are already there. I am hiring you at 20% above your current market rate. You start on Monday." I hit send. I watched the read receipts tick over, one by one. The little icons turned blue. Then, the typing bubbles appeared. A flurry of emojis, exclamation points, and relief flooded the chat. I was now the one choosing who got rescued. I was the one building the team. And I was building it with the people who knew how to work, not the people who knew how to lie. I stood up and walked to the window. The winter sun was bright, reflecting off the glass towers of the city. I looked down at the street. I saw 3 small figures walking out of the Silver Peak building and getting into a black car. It was Richard, the CFO, and Valerie. From up here, on the 30th floor, they looked like ants. I looked across the skyline to the Heliometric building. The logo was still there, but it looked different now. It didn't look like a fortress. It looked like a shell. It looked small. I realized then that the revenge wasn't the termination letter. It wasn't the look on Valerie's face. It wasn't even the money. The revenge was the realization that they had never been powerful. They had just been loud. And the moment someone with actual competence stood up to them, they collapsed. I turned back to the room. Aiden and Lena were packing up their papers, talking about the implementation plan for the new department. I thought about every junior employee who was currently sitting in a gray cubicle somewhere, being told to be grateful, being told they were invisible, being told to fix the mess and keep their mouth shut. This wasn't just a story about me, it was a blueprint for them. I spoke to the room, but mostly to myself. "If they will not negotiate with junior staff," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large space, "we will make sure junior staff never have to beg for the truth again." I picked up my report and walked out of the room, leaving the door wide open behind me. The sharp, satisfying click of my heels on the floor sounded like a gavel banging down. Case closed. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey from that gray cubicle to the boardroom, and I hope it reminded you that your value is defined by your skills, not by a manager who refuses to see them. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your office, your car, or maybe while working on your own exit strategy? Please leave a comment down below and let me know. If you enjoyed seeing the tables turn, please make sure to subscribe to Boss Revenge Stories, hit that like button, and press the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Stay strong, and remember, know your worth.